Yeah, so, I mean, you'll have to pass through the camera, but we haven't actually started yet. So
That's my question.
you have a few seconds. That sun is definitely going to be a problem. Oh, wow. Look at my picture in the camera.
Oh my
The
god.
sun's right in my face.
Okay.
Shift around a bit. You know, it's coming from the other door.
Oh.
And wait.
Oh, man.
Here we go. Okay. So we are live with Eric. Eric, thank you for joining. And thanks for doing this out of schedule. I'm glad that we managed to find a time that works for both of us.
Pleasure to be here.
I think I want to start with talking about your motto. The world is ridiculous. Let's keep it that way. What can you tell me about this?
So the motto, well, first let me say that it's actually stolen from a comic book by Warren Ellis called Planetary. It's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. But it also sums up a big part of my view of the world. I've always really believed that the biggest source of evil in this world is people who lack the ability to laugh at themselves. If you have the ability to laugh at yourself, there's really only so much harm you can cause to the people around you. So by kind of emphasizing the good ridiculousness in our world, which I'm sure we'll talk about several times over our talk, I really like to think that we could build a better world simply by embracing it. And there is so much ridiculousness. The world is completely ridiculous. As George Bernard Shaw said, the world no more ceases to be funny when someone cries than it ceases to be tragic when someone laughs, and that's just true of so much human experience.
Absolutely. Okay, so what can you tell me about? I'd like to know the story of your empire. How did you get the idea to start a Micronation? Why did you choose that name? How the whole story originated?
I have to admit that there's an element of creation myth to all that, because it goes back to when I and the original founders were little kids, and at the time nobody thought to keep very good records of where it all came from. So we've had to reconstruct it all a bit. But as near as we've been able to figure out, it was probably on my 5th birthday where a bunch of us just sort of felt that wouldn't it be great if we had our own country? And of course, as 5-year-olds, you have no idea how much more is involved in that. Everything just seems feasible. So we started it. And then for whatever reason, most kids at some point create imaginary worlds and stuff. And mine just never went away. So it was mostly just sort of my own little side thing for many years, never really forgotten. And then there was this wonderful thing that happened called the internet around 1997. And suddenly I was finding all these other micronations out there, other people who had created something like mine. And I realized there was this wider world we could bring things to. And we created a website, and shockingly, people just keep joining as members.
How many citizens you have, and also what's the location of your country? Because I see I was reading on Wikipedia that you're not just tied to one specific location.
That's right. So today we have 455 members, all of whom are real human beings who have with informed consent completed a citizenship application. They're scattered all over the world. I don't think we currently have anyone in Antarctica. We did at some point, but otherwise they're really all over. And our land claims are similarly scattered all over. Our headquarters, of course, is in Montreal, my home, so legally owned land, not necessarily legally seceded, but legally owned. And we make some land claims in the United States, but they're kind of vague. We have a cow pasture somewhere. Only the cows actually know where it is, so that's a hard one for the tourists to get to. We claim part of the planet Mars, purchased semi-legally from a company called the Lunar Embassy way back when. I think they're still around. And the southern half of the planet Pluto, which is not legally purchased. And one completely imaginary planet called Verdun. Which probably does not exist, but in the event it's eventually discovered, then it's ours. We claimed it a while back.
That's fantastic. How did you purchase not legally Pluto?
Well, we didn't purchase. We just sort of said this is ours now, and for some reason, no one else has objected up until now.
Sounds great. Well, how's the application process to become a citizen? Is it like a hard selection? Is there a fee to pay, or anyone could join? What's the criteria?
We try to make it as unselective as possible because we want to make it possible for as many people to join as can. So there are no fees either to join or ongoing as taxes. That's always a long discussion among us because lots of people involved would love to see us find a way to monetize this, but that's never been the main goal. Becoming a citizen is really as simple as just completing the application form, which is only a very short thing, only takes a few seconds to complete. Should actually probably be a little longer as a form of quality control. And then they're a member. The hardest part of the process is that I then send every single applicant an email asking them to confirm that they really want to join. And about half people never respond to that email. So I don't know if that's because they change their mind or it goes to their junk mail or who knows what. The much harder part, where we lose a lot of our members, is every year we do something called the culling of the inactive, where an email goes out to every single member just to prove that they're still alive. Because otherwise, unlike bigger countries, we don't have tax records or hospital records or things to prove people are still out there. And anyone who doesn't respond to that email within a month loses their citizenship as well. So that's one of our methods of making sure that when we say we have 455 people, then at least as of last June, that was all people who are still alive and knew they're citizens.
Yeah, you need to have some sort of like death count as well. Like, how can you be aware if people? You need the registry. It's interesting. So the goal is not to make a profit out of it.
Well, it would be nice, but no. I was very realistic when I got into doing this that I was probably never going to make any money. I have been surprised though. I mean, when we've minted coins and banknotes in the past, we've at least broken even on those. And there was a short period in medical school where I was actually paid to do some modeling based on my work with the Empire, and that was a shocking amount of money considering how little work had to go into it. It's a good lifestyle working as a model, and the money from that paid all of our expenses for several years. So it can be monetized. We just haven't.
Interesting. Let's talk about the modeling a little bit. I have a few questions about what the system is, but I'm intrigued by the modeling, and I also like your how do you call it, uniform outfit? What's the right word for it?
Uniform outfit. The popular term in the community is regalia.
Regalia. Okay. What can you tell me about it? Like, I like the smiley faces, and I think they're just a metaphor for like they represent your motto in a way, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So first of all, I'll tell you I'm wearing an LIS original. It's my designs, heavily influenced by stuff stolen off of Pinterest, which is a great resource for costume ideas. And the suit itself was made by a costume company in China. So yeah, cost less than a regular suit that I would wear to work. It's terribly comfortable. I highly recommend it. The smiley faces, you're right, sort of represent the national motto, the national philosophy, but also it's just this wonderful internationally recognized symbol. Most people, they see a smiley face and they can't help but have a positive reaction to that. And we know it's hardwired into our very brains that infants are born and they react to a smiling face. So something about it is this universal symbol that people can really relate to. They don't necessarily like it, but they can relate to it.
Interesting. And I like how you said something about being universally recognized. I like the concept that to bring people to bring people together, we need to like transcend some forms of obstacles, and communication and language can be an obstacle to bringing people together. So in terms of like policy, the way you manage your nation, do you have any goal in those regards, like uniting people, or your goal is rather like expanding your nation and conquering or acquiring more territory? Well, what's the purpose of the empire?
A bit of all of the above. The official goal of the Aerican Empire is to conquer this pitiful mudball under my rule. Since that is obviously never going to happen, and I don't think I would like it very much if it did, the less official goal has been to try and be a model of what a country could look like. We try and institute government and government policies based on what we think a good country would do, and in that way, we want to show what something could look like. Both, a functioning, efficient government, but also the whole tongue-in-cheek aspect and being able to take things not too seriously. So the government has to run efficiently. The paperwork has to get filed and records have to get processed. But it doesn't mean that there can't be a little bit of silliness to it. And then coming to this other point you said, there's always the goal of expanding in different ways. We haven't wanted to expand our territory for a while because as it is, we've got a whole bunch of territory that understandably we're not using. But certainly it's always wonderful to attract new people. And the most fun part of being in a micronation, I've always found, isn't even actually implementing my own policies, but having someone who I've never met before come in and join the country. And after a year or 2 or 7 or whatever of being a member, suddenly they come up with some brilliant idea for us to do, something that really expands the culture or the government. And then I have the fun of implementing this thing that I would never have thought of myself. And then I really have the feeling like I've brought something into the world. It's tremendous fun.
I can imagine. I can only imagine. Sounds fascinating. How hard is it? Like in terms of commitment to run a nation? Like how much of your time does it use?
Well, let's bear in mind that we're not running a very big nation here. So I'm actually watching The Crown with my wife these days, the British show, and I'm seeing how much time and effort has to go into running a government like that, and it seems like a terrible deal. Running the empire takes me about an hour per week, scattered across different days, responding to emails, processing the new citizenship applications. A big part of the job, which is our foreign relations, actually isn't me. That's handled by my foreign minister, and that takes a huge load off my hands. But for him, even, I think it's only a couple of hours per week. And most of that is writing polite letters to new countries saying, no, we aren't going to recognize you. You appear to be ridiculous. And not in a not so good sense.
Going back to, okay, what are your political views in the rest of the world? So you founded an empire. You're that's a monarchy, right? So how does that affect your political views in the outside world? Like, are you pro monarchy or where do you stand?
Well, first, let me say it's actually the emperor is actually an elected position in the Aerican Empire.
Oh,
So
okay, I didn't know.
Well, hey, don't look so surprised because the monarchy part's coming. It is still a micronation. It's all about self-aggrandizement. So it is an elected position, but of course, emperor is a position for life because I'm the one who wrote the Constitution and I knew what's good for me. But in theory, when I either step down some years from now, or if anything should happen to me, and I truly hope the empire would outlast me, there are provisions in place for how to elect my replacement. Beyond that, the emperor actually does not have very much power. In our the executive branch of our government is a senate, which has 2 members from each of our colonies, all of whom are elected. And when any government business comes up, each of the senators has 1 vote. And then the emperor has a second additional vote in the event of ties and things like that. So it's a little bit of extra power. But in theory, the Senate itself has a lot more power than I do. So it is in most ways democratic. That being said, I am the only person who has the passwords to our website, so I can do pretty much anything I want and nobody can stop me. And of course, as the public face of the government in different intermicronational forums and meetings and things, I am the one whose voice gets heard the most. So that's effective power certainly sits in my hand. But coming back to what you asked, my political feelings were really influenced by being born in Canada. I had the very good fortune to be born in one of the safest and most peaceful countries in the world, a place where it's safe to create your own country and claim that you're separating.
I love Canada, by the way. I've been there a couple of times, and it's just like, but I've been to the other coast. I was in Vancouver.
That's the right one to go on. So, I mean, I do believe in democracy, but then again, I also believe in, I'm embarrassed. I forget if it was Winston Churchill or Aristotle who said something to the effect of that democracy is the worst form of government. It's just the best one we've tried so far.
I think it was, might have been Winston Churchill.
Something like that. I'm sure I'm butchering the quotation because it doesn't sound right. So I do believe strongly, actually, in the benevolent dictatorship. I think what the world in this moment probably needs is one person to just take it over and fix stuff and make the decisions that are unpopular that no politician is ever going to make. But I also recognize that there's nobody out there who I would trust to be the one to have that power, including myself. So in that sense, I tend towards democracy. It, keeps any one person from doing anything too stupid.
Well, the problem that was happening, at least like in the Roman Empire, they would put somebody in charge in times of war, and then they wouldn't remove themselves in times of peace. So power goes to your head, and then, that's the trick, that's a catch, I guess.
My favorite philosopher, Douglas Adams, said, anyone capable of gaining power should by no means be allowed to have it.
Absolutely.
Luckily, I'm completely unqualified to have power, and therefore I'm the right choice.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Like, in the sense that sometimes we should trust who we don't expect to trust, in a certain sense. Like somebody whose goal is not to get to power. If they have no interest in power, then probably they're fit to do what's best for the rest of the population. How does your position of leader affect, or vice versa? How does your job as a psychiatrist affect your work as a leader of a micronation?
It's a funny question for me because I founded the empire when I was so young. I've never really lived without being the emperor. As far as my earliest memories go, this was already a part of my identity.
Which is what happens to most emperors anyway.
I guess so. Sure, there's certainly the ones who are born into it or conquer at a young age. I never would have had the chance to ask Alexander the Great. How did your life change after you? But yeah. So he definitely plays a role. I think actually it goes both ways. So my experience with micronations definitely shaped my approach to mental health and psychiatry because I've had the chance to meet people from all over the world. I've interacted with cultures I never would have come across otherwise. I've had political discussions and ethical discussions. So it really broadened my mind, to all the different ways people can see the world. And that, when you work in mental health, is a huge asset. The ability to step out of your own preconceptions and think about how other people do things. So that's been good for me. And I guess the other way around, I ended up working in mental health because I'm interested in human beings, and especially I'm interested in stories. So, when you get right down to it, micronations are very much someone just trying to write their story in a different way, and especially trying to share that story with other people in some way.
Interesting. You mentioned that you are an expert on the first American emperor. Mm. What do you mean by that?
Emperor Joshua Norton of the United States.
Joshua Norton, yeah.
What I wrote to you in my message was that I might be the world's authority on the mental health of Emperor Joshua Norton. And I say this because I am, to my knowledge, the only mental health expert in the world who has ever actually been written and published something on the topic. So I am certainly the most published person in the world on the subject of his mental health. And having gone to a couple of different hospitals and given talks about him, I'm probably the person who spent the most time talking about it in academic circles. Somebody else might know it more than me, but they've spent less time on the subject. But I had the great pleasure a few years ago of writing a paper looking at Emperor Norton based on what we know about him. I didn't meet the man. A quick word for your listeners, Joshua Norton lived in the 1800s. He was a resident of San Francisco, born in, I want to say, South Africa, and moved to San Francisco. He was a successful businessman, lost his fortune, probably went completely mad, and declared himself the Emperor of the United States and reigned for over 30 years. And what's wonderful about his story is how the whole city of San Francisco sort of adopted him and treated him like the emperor. So here was this person who might have ended up homeless or on the streets or dead or who knows what, who instead became this hero and had tens of thousands of people march at his funeral. But he probably did suffer from a mental disorder, most likely what we would call a delusional disorder. And we can go into that if you like, but nobody really cares about the boring details. The fact is, he was this amazing man who made the world a really more interesting place and made a lot of people very happy.
How did he make people happy? What kind of influence did he have on the city, like on the, or at least in his environment?
Norton influenced the environment in a few ways. One was people just really liked having this guy walking around the streets in an emperor's costume. They enjoyed it. Local businesses would accept his basically homemade currency. He was given free food at restaurants and free seats at the opera and plays because everyone wanted to be able to say, the emperor comes here. He was given free regalia and walking sticks by the city, I guess because they didn't want him looking shabby if he was the emperor. And other cities actually competed. Other cities tried to poach him away to come live there. But I guess he must have just really loved San Francisco. There's a lot of stories of his proclamations, among others. I'm not going to remember the names of all the people involved, but he was actually an early advocate for mental health in that era. When there was a failed rebellion, I want to say, in the United States, Norton advocated that instead of execution, the man who had led the rebellion should have received mental health care because he was probably ill. There's a certain irony there, but certainly some empathy. And there's a myth, probably only a myth, probably never happened, but this wonderful story where supposedly he put himself between an angry mob and San Francisco's Chinatown and just stood in front of the mob and prayed until the mob got embarrassed and walked away. And in doing so, probably saved lives and who knows how many thousands of dollars in property damage. So he really was this fantastic figure. Again, that story probably never happened, but it says something about who people think or want to think that he was.
That's fascinating.
And aside from that, he was pro giving people the vote. He was pro freedom. He was against political parties on the grounds that they were probably divisive of the population, which gods know the universe proved him right about that.
Is there any legacy to what he did or what he was like?
He's still very much a hero in San Francisco. His grave is the site of a pilgrimage. There's always little stones on his gravestone from people who drop by. I had a lot of fun. I had the pleasure of going on a walking tour of downtown San Francisco, led by an actor who gives the entire 2 or 3 hour tour in character as Emperor Norton. Tremendous fun. He breaks character only about halfway through during the coffee break, and then he talks a bit about why he did that. There's a statue of Norton near one of the city bridges, and he is, even to this day, very much regarded as a hero. Aside from that, there's been a couple of musicals written about him. He's been his character has been used in comic books and novels and things. There's even a brand of absinthe named after him.
Wow.
So he's quite a guy. I've never been able to get my hands on a bottle. It's very hard to get outside of San Francisco.
I can imagine. I'll keep that in mind next time I go to San Francisco. Going back to the Aerican Empire, what's the... Okay, what fascinates me about micronations, and I mentioned this on my conversation to Emperor George as well. Oh, by the way, I should wear his pin. He gave me this fantastic pin.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry we have to do this from different sides of the ocean, because if we were meeting face, I would absolutely give you some sort of present you could wear as well.
Thank you very much.
Very hard to.
So I mentioned to him that the reason why at first I got interested in micronation was because I had this rough idea that I wanted to do something like that. So I guess I'll start with another question. You being a psychiatrist, how does one person ego affect the desire to start a nation? Like, do you think that's generally the main drive, or there is something more than that?
I can't answer that with certainty. Of course, as a scientist, of course, I have to let you know when I do and don't have evidence for what I'm saying. But having had the chance to meet a lot of people who founded their own country, and not just micronations, I'm also thinking about people who I've met on psychiatry wards who believed they were kings and emperors and things. So there's this spectrum of healthy ways of starting your country and unhealthy ways of starting your country. But there probably is always some degree of ego. It's not a surprise that most micronations are ruled by a monarch or something like that, because people, when they're creating something, of course they want to be in charge, whether they're qualified for it or not, and whether they would actually enjoy being in charge in the real world or not. I think when I started doing it, I don't know how much ego came in, because I don't think I consciously wanted to be the big person, the big cheese. but I somehow did end up as emperor, and obviously I haven't given it away ever since. So certainly there's some ego there. It makes me happy to think that whatever else is going on in my life, and however much respect I'm being treated by the person standing behind the counter at the restaurant, I am still royalty. So there's definitely some ego there. And I think most micronationalists who you meet, at least the ones who create their own countries, there's a little bit of a thrill of knowing that you're the person in charge, even when you don't have very much power, and any power you have is just given to you by your friends.
Absolutely. I guess I have two questions then. One is, what's the goal? Like, how do you see the Aerican Empire grow in the near future? And the other one is, how do you plan on, or how do you wish to affect the world? What's the impact that you would like this nation to have on the world?
So I'll answer that in order. So I mean, in terms of how we hope to grow in the future, the most obvious one, of course, is just to keep attracting new citizens over time, and thereby wonderful new ideas and creative new blood. Because, like I said, we've done so many wonderful things that would never have occurred to just me. I really want to believe the Empire is something bigger than I am, even if I'm the only member of it most people will ever see. And then, we have all the various accoutrements of a country, meaning we mint our coins, we produce banknotes, we print passports. So I'd love to see us do more things like that. We recently acquired a 3D printer, which is sadly broken at the moment, with the goal of starting to print up more medals that we can give away more cheaply. Maybe start making little figurines that we could give people, for use in games like Warhammer and things.
That's nice. How does the passport work? Like, what kind of
It doesn't work.
Okay.
I would strongly advise anyone against trying to cross borders using our passport, because they, and perhaps I, would get in a great deal of trouble. But it's a novelty document, and for legal purposes, it says all over it that it's a novelty document. But most importantly, as with so much of what we do, it's just meant to give people a smile. And particularly when we go to micronational meetings and things, and I know you talked about that with His Majesty George of Atlantium. I bring with some passports, and people are happy to take one, and then we sort of all go around to each other's tables, stamping each other's passports, and it's jolly good fun.
Yeah, it's good. I think that would make also for a great collection of regalia as well. I know that there is a lot of interest in that. Like, George himself told me, Emperor George, that one of the main sources of income of the Micronation is basically comes from the coins and notes that he prints.
That's exactly.
How much is it merchandise? Does it qualify as merchandise?
Yeah, it probably qualifies as merchandise. But I think if you were a coin collector getting coins from the United States, you'd probably still call that merchandise. It would just be merchandise of a defined value. It's true that a lot of our income does compete from people buying coins and banknotes. Just last week, I was sending some off to a guy. And again, we try and sell them at a low enough cost to be accessible to everybody, but we also want to make some of our money back. Passports we do sell, but they're also freely available on our website for download or printing at home. Because again, the goal isn't to monetize it as much as it is to just make it available to people.
Sounds good to me.
I'm sorry?
Sounds good. Like, I like this poor interest towards monetization to keep the goal of the Micronation more pure. And in those regards, what's the agenda of your nation? Like, what again? How do you envision your impact on the world to be?
It's something I think about from time to time. The short tongue-in-cheek answer is that I have no vision of what my impact in the world is going to be, and probably I will have absolutely none. But more broadly speaking, I have a very, very small measure of fame in the world at this moment, since my name is on a Wikipedia article and things. Every so often I meet someone for the first time and they say, "Oh, I've heard of you," which is always a little terrifying. I would like to think that if I have any impact on this world, it's coming back again to our motto, that I've made the world just a slightly better and slightly stranger place. I would hope that 100 years from now, some kid is going to read my story and think, oh, I can try to accomplish the impossible. Why not? And hopefully something will come of that. I'm quite certain, I'm not brilliant enough to come up with new political philosophy that's going to change the world. I don't understand economics well enough to solve every crisis on the planet right now, and I wouldn't be a very good emperor if I actually was in charge of the world. But what I am good at is bringing together the right people, and I hope that my legacy, as you might say, is going to be that the next person, far more brilliant than me, is going to come along and do something really cool. And we'll see what happens with that, I guess.
Interesting. It's definitely a very valuable skill, the ability to bring the right people together. And when I say right people, comes to mind a question that I often find myself asking to myself, if that makes sense. Good people implies that there is good, so there must be bad. So do you agree that ultimately there is an objective good and bad?
That's a wonderful question. I'd have to preface my answer by saying that I'm a scientist and not a philosopher.
Okay.
So there are some important dimensions to that question I'm not qualified to answer. I think it depends how you're using the word good and bad. And I'm not trying to weasel out of your question. A second ago, we were talking about the right people, and obviously we didn't mean just moral, ethical, good people. We meant the people who will work well together and do the right thing. But if you're asking about objective good and bad, part of me wants to say no, as a moral relativist. But I think there are some things that most people would agree with. That there is such a thing as good, healthy selfishness, enlightened self-interest, but that by and large, if you're going to murder a family and eat their skin, that's probably not a good thing. We can agree on certain things.
Probably not. Yeah.
And then some culture somewhere, if we ever discover alien races one day, then I'm sure that, as Star Trek has suspected, they will have all sorts of interesting different ways of seeing good and evil. Scientifically, I can tell you there's a handful of genes that have been associated with things like criminality and lacking empathy. The short form of the serotonin transporter gene and the monoamine oxidase A gene. But even someone who's born with those genes isn't necessarily evil. They're just potentially predisposed to certain behavior patterns, and most of those behavior patterns only if they themselves go through some sort of trauma in their youth. So a lot of what we call evil is probably sort of a reaction to a person's own pain, where for whatever reason someone has to turn off their empathy and then become kind of a monster.
Interesting. Can we dive into that a little bit? I always been interested in. I was having a similar conversation with a psychologist a few months ago. Lack of empathy can lead to, and forgive me if I don't use the right terms, but sociopath or psychopath. I'm not really sure what the difference is right now, but they're generally associated with. So the main issue with them is like a lack of empathy, right? And that makes them act in a way that could be harmful towards other individuals.
The classic teaching is that psychopaths are people who lack empathy and therefore don't care if they hurt other people. But there's another way of looking at that, which I have some sympathy with, but is not the official stance, which is that certainly some of the people I've met who on the surface can appear kind of monstrous, when you get to know them, they really have a lot of empathy. But to survive in the world they're in, they've had to at least in certain situations turn that off. Which is why you can see these people who are going out and selling drugs one day, but then they're fantastic with their friends and family the next. And then, of course, if you look at a really successful psychopath, the ones who run companies and things, they must have something like empathy because they understand how other people think. They can empathize with another person to the extent of knowing how that person's going to think and react. They can be manipulative. They can play with emotions. So it's not empathy in the sense of I care that I've hurt you, but it's something in that family. So it's probably more complicated than just having or not having empathy.
Yeah. Because in order to manipulate someone, you need to first understand what they're feeling and what they're thinking.
Exactly.
And you're saying that all
Well,
of this is associated to a genetic predisposition, so the ability to
to some
switch on and off.
it's probably not just one gene, but yeah, there's a handful of genes that we know are more commonly seen in people with some of these disorders, like what we call antisocial personality, which at its extreme becomes psychopathy and sociopathy. And pardon me as I just scoot around trying to escape the sun. It's not just to keep the audience on its toes by changing the background.
That's perfect. It actually looks better. Is there any treatment for that, like through pharmaceutical or therapy?
If only. Generally speaking, people with these disorders don't get better with therapy. They can actually respond to things like social skills training. If they want to learn, if you can persuade someone that they should act as if they had empathy to avoid being punished by society, that actually works sometimes. And that's where you get the people. I'm not going to nitpick your words, but a few minutes ago you said someone who lacks empathy, it makes them hurt others. And that's not necessarily true. Someone who lacks empathy can still choose not to hurt others. It's just harder for them to want to not hurt others.
Interesting.
But there are certainly people out there who are complete bastards, but they get along just fine because they're not overtly bastards. And we bump into these people on a daily basis. But where you get into trouble is the people who do the really over-the-top kind of things. So you can always help some people. And then, of course, you've got the people who aren't born monsters, but they grow up in poverty and they have to turn to crime or gangs just to survive. And these are the people who later on can really turn their life around and often go on to help the next generation become a lot better. So it's we never want to just say that someone is evil. It really wipes out the possibility they can become better than they appear to be today.
Yeah, I think labeling is always not the best thing to do in most scenarios. But you mentioned like how society punishes individual. Let's talk about that if you like for a little while. I'm interested in your ideas in the regards of consequences for, let's say, breaking the law in different countries, including in your micronation. Like, what happens in your micronation when somebody acts in an unlawful way? And I guess where I want to go is how do you see the world if you compare like the political the judiciary system in I don't know, in the US compared to Sweden, for instance?
So the first thing I have to say is that fortunately this is something we've never really had to experiment with. There's very little crime in the empire that we know of. Part of that is because our population is so spread out, of course. There's only so much harm one member of the empire can do to another. So we
That's
never
good,
really
I guess.
It's one of the advantages of a distributed population. I'm sure we've had members probably go to jail and I just never found out about it. And perhaps that's why some of them ended up losing their citizenship and not responding to our annual email. And we've certainly had members who were victims of crime. And then, as much as I might wish to, there's very little I can do about that. We have to leave it to the authorities of the macro nations that they live in. In theory, if we had a penal system, the empire would want to have one that moves away from the death penalty, if at all possible, and hopefully move away from incarceration. Years of good quality scientific research have really shown that jail doesn't do a lot of good things for people. The worst people go in and they come out more bad, and plenty of innocent people come in and they also come out more bad. Not necessarily more criminal, but usually with more trauma. But I also don't know what's better. I don't think anyone has yet come up with something to replace the prison system as we currently know it, except moving away from for-profit prisons, which are one of the most horrifying things in the entire world.
Absolutely.
Personal opinion, anyway. Again, actually, there is scientific evidence to back that up, just not that it's the most horrible thing in the world, just plain horrible. I hope that if and when I'm in a position to run an actual country that would need to answer this question, I'm going to need some very, very smart advisors to help me come up with this. But beyond saying prison bad, rehabilitation good, I don't have a brilliant answer to that question.
Because I guess the problem is not about the punishment, but the rehabilitation itself. How to help these individuals to contribute to society and act in a much more positive way. And this is a question that has been asked for years and centuries, and there is no answer so far.
And part of it is, of course, there's always the certain percentage who just can't be rehabilitated, either again because they're psychopaths and by definition won't get better, don't want to, or because we don't have the tools. It's tough. But certainly we know some people do get better with treatment as opposed to punishment. The trouble is that as human beings, we just really enjoy punishing. It makes us feel good.
Yes. I mean, because that comes down to power, I guess, right?
Power and retribution, all these things. But power is certainly the biggest part of it.
Why do people find pleasure in power?
I kind of want to say they just do, as if that's the simple answer. Most people like having power, and the only difference is whether we manifest that by playing video games, which fulfill our power fantasies, or by beating up our romantic partner, which gives us a kind of power in another way entirely, and obviously not a great one. I mean, we could talk about neurobiology and how the feeling of power gives us a little hit of dopamine, the neurotransmitter in the brain behind both pleasure and addiction. But when you get right down to it, it's just something about the way we're built. And on an evolutionary biology level, it probably speaks to the traits that we needed to survive, to outperform the next person over and have a better cave and have better food. You had to be willing to take their stuff and run away with it, or at least, kill another animal and eat it.
Yeah, I thought it would come down to dopamine or to any possible chemical reaction that happens in our brains, because that's generally what drives human emotions anyway, and not just the negative ones, even the positive ones. If you think about love, for instance, that's just like something that happens in our brain. It's an inflammation, I might say.
Basically, I don't want to be overly reductive, but on a certain level, everything that happens in our world, our perception of our world, is just one neurotransmitter or another firing. And obviously it gets a little more complex than that. I don't personally believe that we are, this pre-programmed computer with no free will, but on a biological level, that's sort of what we are. Stimulus triggers dopamine, therefore seek out stimulus again.
I like where this could go. We're not a biological computer with no free will. Let's break that down a little bit. I kind of tend to, I'm not sure believe is the right word, but I sympathize for the first part of for the premise that claims that we are biological computers. And again, computer as well might not be the perfect word, but machine might be more. I don't think we have the right word to define what I'm trying to say, but we're definitely the closest approximation would be a biological machine. But where it gets tricky is the free will part. What do you think about free will?
Again, not a philosopher, so I take anything I say with no salt. To some extent, your use of the word machine is exactly correct. There are some things which are just programmed into us. If you hit me with a hammer, I will react, whether I choose to or not.
Yes.
If you inject certain drugs into me, I will feel euphoria or rage or fear or something, whether I want to or not. So we are, in the end, slaves to our biology. But where I would bring in concepts like free will, I'll say in two ways. One is, again, this beautiful ridiculousness in the world. It's just really hard to imagine that a mere biological machine would ever write 3 seasons of the television show Monty Python, because there's no biological benefit to that. It makes no sense. It's fun, but it makes no sense. So there's got to be not just machinery, or at least a machine that's capable of being completely absurd for its own sake. And then the other part is the people who are capable of acting against their apparent best interests. And of course, we see this in animals as well. It's not just us brilliant, wise Homo sapiens sapiens who are able to act with sacrifice or whatever, meerkats and fish and all kinds of things will sacrifice their lives for loved ones. The great biologist J.B.S. Haldane famously said, and again I'm going to butcher this quote, but something to the effect of, "I will give my life for my brother, or for 2 cousins, 4 half cousins, or 8 more distant relatives." And he was playing with the idea of heredity and genomes and family trees, of course. But the idea of altruism, which biologists debate back and forth, really argues against us just being machines. And people are able to do weird stuff for seemingly crazy reasons.
This is absolutely fascinating. Like I could talk about, but in the end, it's just speculations, I guess. There is no.
The fun thing about evolutionary biology is you're always just coming up with a post hoc, an after the fact explanation that can never actually be theoretically tested, which means you can say anything you like. It's tremendous. It's tremendously satisfying.
Yes, and that gives us like pleasure in a way as well. Did you read the book *Sapiens* or any of that saga?
Yuval Noah Harari.
Yes.
I really enjoyed *Homo Deus*, especially. So brilliant stuff.
Same.
And he wrestles with some of these questions.
Absolutely. Do you agree with this theory? I think I like, again, the premise. Like, it builds up to a point and then it reaches a conclusion and I'm like, maybe. But everything that came before that, I was like, yeah, that sounds like right.
Well, I mean, so taking *Homo Deus*, for example, Harari, he's talking about stuff I would call mental health issues from the perspective of a historian, which is not wrong. I mean, one of the seminal books of psychiatry was written by a historian as opposed to an analyst or whatever. So not knocking that, but he comes at it from a particular perspective, and I don't 100% share that perspective. I agree with a lot of the conclusions he comes up with when he talks about, for example, our evolving towards this almost cybernetic relationship with social media and with sharing photos and things. Whether it would become, as he sort of hypothesizes, a new religion or replace human religion, I think that's where he was, sort of exaggerating a bit for dramatic effect. But I think he does hit the nail on the head when he's talking about the existential issues that all human beings face. The having, not necessarily fearing death, but having to decide what it means that we've got a limited time on this world, probably. If anyone out there is immortal and we don't know about it. And that we therefore have to find some sort of meaning in completely ridiculous world.
And about the concept of a collective global consciousness, there are some people who theorize that the evolution of what we cannot really sense right now is gonna go through machines as well. More specifically, AI and human AI integrations. Do you think, like, disregarding all the sci-fi behind this, do you think that in the future it would be realistic to have to solve the problem of a ruler that doesn't want to remove himself or themselves from power? Do you think the problem could be solved thanks to AI? So, like, humankind collectively generating some sort of artificial algorithm or whatever that is going to be impartial and able to regulate everything for everyone?
I think if I'm curious what Elon Musk would say to that question. I think it's almost inevitable that if human knowledge and computing power continues exploding the way it has, then in this exponential kind of way, it's almost inevitable that there will eventually be an artificial intelligence with the brilliance and hopefully the ethical code to be the perfect leader. But I think there's going to be 2 problems. I think number 1 is you'll have a really hard time finding that AI in the pile of other AIs who don't have the ethical framework to be the perfect leader or the intelligence. And I think the other problem is that when this perfectly ethical, flawless AI comes about, I give it about 30 minutes before the angry mob storms the computing center and smashes it all to bits with pitchforks. So it probably will happen one day if we follow the kind of pattern we're on at the moment. But I think the innate annoyingness of humans, our refusal to do what we're told, is going to be the biggest obstacle to anything like that. So until such time as we actually start uploading ourselves, I think an AI leader is going to have a very hard time selling itself.
What do you mean by uploading ourselves?
Ram a sticker on the back of your laptop, and I think they've played with that concept a couple of times. AI is definitely smarter than us, but we're going to destroy it before it can do anything.
Makes sense. I don't know. To me, it's like a bit of a terrifying concept. Not just that, just also the concept that some scientists say that we're going to be able to transfer consciousness while we don't really understand what consciousness is or where it resides. Like, how can you transfer something that, like, you have no idea what you're talking about?
Well, I mean, the flippant answer is what I would tell you is that as far as I understand computers, my computer works basically by magic, but I'm still able to turn it on, turn it off, and make it do most things. So it's entirely possible in my mind that we might one day find a way to map a human's neural network, although I think we're a long, long way away from having that technology, no disrespect to certain Arnold Schwarzenegger films. But there was this famous quote, which again, I'm going to forget who said it, but it was something to the effect of, oh, bother, what is it? Oh, yes. How embarrassing. You're halfway through a quotation in your head and you forget it. Anyway, something like the fact that we will never be able to understand the human brain because we can never have a brain complex enough to understand itself. And I really wish I remembered the correct phrasing because it sounds so much better when someone else says it. Whatever.
That's all right. That's all right.
I don't know if we'll ever understand the brain. If anything, one of the things we'll need AI for is to one day have an AI brilliant enough to understand our brains, and then that AI, sure, might find a way to digitize our consciousnesses. And then, of course, we're going to have the fun of the first time somebody hacks another person's brain and goes in and changes some of the programming, and that's going to inevitably be a problem if society moves in this sort of direction.
Absolutely. It makes me think of those experiments that they've done to like cockroaches when they put electrodes in their brains and they can actually pilot them with a remote control, and the cockroach is still alive and aware, but just cannot. He loses will, like in any shape or form.
I don't know how aware it is, but I take your point. Yeah.
I mean, aware of to the extent of how aware a normal cockroach would be.
Yeah, and you're right. Humans are another level of complexity, but as it is, I could drill a little hole in your brain, stick in an electrode, and make your fingers move. So the rest is just a question of scale.
Yes. Elon Musk comes to mind again with his Neuralink project. I don't know if you know about it.
I'm not an expert, but I understand the basics, and he's wrestling with exactly some of these concepts we're talking about. If the brain is quote unquote just a series of electrical impulses and basically open closed gates, and it's a little more than that, but in the end that's what it is, then in theory all the same rules that apply to a computer could apply to a person in terms of manipulating and reprogramming and copying and transferring. But probably I kind of hope that we don't have this technology during my lifetime.
It's frightening, isn't it? I think the original goal is to help people with disabilities to live a better life. But ultimately, if they're going to be able to interact in a way with your brain, like having an integration that allows you to use electronics with your mind, and this is something that I find fascinating in another way. Like, let's say because they already have like robotic limbs that you can control with your mind. So as soon as that technology allows you to send a text message with your mind, that means that everyone becomes telepathic to an extent.
To an extent, you're right.
And
It's an exciting and terrifying idea, and it will go wrong, and then hopefully we'll figure out how to make it go less wrong. This video game that's popular right now, Cyberpunk 2077, that people have been playing, which of course is so riddled with bugs as to be in some ways non-functional, which shows you how reliable our computers are. It plays exactly with some of these concepts, and the ways it'll work well, the ways it'll go wrong, the way society will change and perhaps collapse because of these things. You know, humankind has proven that it's not very good at keeping up with the pace of technological change.
Absolutely. And on that note of like the collapse of the society, I wanna thank you for this fantastic conversation that we're having. And is there anything else that you wanna add or talk about?
No, I mean, obviously, I think everyone who's listening to this should go join my empire and become one of my legions of servants and contribute to making the world a better, stranger place under my unquestioned tyrannical leadership. But realistically, a bunch of them aren't going to, and that's fine because everyone needs to do their own thing. But
absolutely,
look into it.
For the ones who want to do it, what's a website where they should go to? It's
Aerican Empire, like American with no M, again named by 5-year-olds. .com. And of course, if you type Aerican Empire into Google, it's the first match. And if you type my name into Google, it's the first match. Much to the consternation of a famous neuroradiologist down in the United States who comes up, I think, 5th in the Google rankings because of me.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you so much for this chat, and I look forward to talk to you soon again.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.